In a year with tectonic transformation economically, from sweeping tariffs to trade wars to the surge of national debt to the rate of inflation, and also we're experiencing also the longest government shutdown in American history. And to discuss that today, I will have Dr. Jill Becarius Pescatore to discuss the economic impacts and what's happening around the country. Right here on The Abstract with Musao. Thank you, Professor, for joining me. Professor Pescatore teaches micro and macroeconomics and has a history of being a manager for Sneaker King.
Me
So
too.
you can hook me up on which sneakers to get.
Okay.
And also, she serves on the ward committee for the 5th ward of the city of Philadelphia. So before we get into the economics, we recently had elections yesterday. What was sort of the atmosphere at the polling station?
Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me here to talk about economics because, it's something that I love and most people are like, okay, you said enough about that. So I appreciate that. So yesterday, actually, during an election that's not a non-presidential election, and especially with judges, you don't necessarily expect to have a lot of turnout. But yesterday was not that. So I serve in the Fairmount section of Philadelphia, and it was very brisk. Our turnout numbers were actually higher than they were for the primary, and it was all day. So it was people that were just interested in Supreme Court justices, and that was really what was on the ballot for Pennsylvania. So I was excited that it was as busy as it was.
So what do you do in the sort of ward committee?
In the ward committee, so Philadelphia is divided up into voting wards, and so as a committee member, we do a lot of information for our constituents. It has a lot to do with voter information, with where to get registered. We have canvassing that we do. We had an event that actually the judicial candidates came out and they talked to members of the community, and then we had a canvass launch from there. We also connect community members with very exciting things like potholes in the roads and that kind of stuff, because it's those kind of things that it's nice to have neighbors and connections to get those things done, just making people's lives better. Also, because of the shutdown, we've had some social media information out also about where food banks and sharing information on that because of the SNAP cuts and also of the layoffs.
Okay, so last year this time was the presidential election, and the big conversation was the cost of living, and we're still talking about the cost of living today. So before we had this interview, I was asking students, what should I ask an economics professor? And one question that kept coming up is, why doesn't the government print more money?
So that is a great question, and it seems like that might be a great idea on the surface. So just to kind of take a step back, the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, they're in charge of monetary policy, and so they were created through an act of Congress, and one of the things that they do is they have what's called a dual mandate, and this dual mandate means that they are targeting an inflation rate of about 2% and maximum unemployment. We generally say sometimes somewhere between 3 and 4%. So in a time when the economy is slowing down, and people are out of work, it would seem intuitive that, well, if we had more money, then we could be okay and we could spend more money. The problem is that if you printed more money, that creates more currency out there, and what do we want to do when we have currency? Right? We want to spend it, right? We want to spend it. But in an economic downturn, that also means that there's not as much being produced, right? Okay. So then there's not as much out there to buy. So now we have all this money and there's not as many goods.
Okay.
So what happens, we call that too many dollars chasing too few goods, and that's inflation. So when you have inflation, what that means is you can have a lot of dollars, but if they don't have purchasing power, then you're spending a lot of, like maybe you're spending $100 on something that perhaps is only $80 worth it. So,
so I'll tell students that
that is not a good idea.
Yeah, they want higher inflation if they want the government to
Right, right. And then you don't want that because then when you get your paycheck, you're buying your less real goods than you were before, even though the number's higher.
Okay. So the Federal Reserve produced a report in June. There's no report as of now due to the government shutdown. So the price index for personal consumption expenditure, or PCE, rose to 2.1 over 12 months ending in April and down 2.6 end of last year. So what is sort of this difference with the 2.6% and the 2.1%?
So I think in order to answer that question, it would be important also to see where we were and then where we are, and also kind of refer back to the last question about inflation and about what the Fed does. So the inflation rate of 2%, part of that dual mandate, the idea is that if prices rise at a rate of around 2% on average, it's not like just gasoline, we actually take the average prices in an index. So the PCE is actually an inflation rate that is used by the Fed, and that's quarterly. So it will show over a quarter the average rate of prices as they rise. We want them to be somewhere around 2% because, and I think the best example is to say, if you get a raise, and if your raise is 3%, and then this number, that inflation rate, like you have here, the 2 to 2.1, if that number was 5%, right? So what that would actually mean is that your raise, you lost 2% of real purchasing power. Okay, so what we look at and how that's targeted, that 2%, is that number is supposed to be in a line with how wages, the percentage that wages will grow. So at the very least, we could have maximum employment, which we also know as full employment, and that our income, it will grow at a predictable way that we will be able to actually buy the things that we want to buy, and our real value will stay the same. When post-COVID, because of all of the money that was out there from the stimulus checks, that really led to an inflation rate of, it was up to 8%. So as we're moving through this, and as you saw in here, that PCE, it rose to 2.1% and then down from 2.6%. That is really the Federal Reserve adjusting the interest rates in order to bring us as close as we can to that price stability number.
Okay. I would like to move on to the labor markets. So unemployment rate is at 4.2% and has been at a historic low. First, could this historic low, could it be credited to the current administration or maybe the previous administration?
That's a good question. I stick with, and I've said this to my classes for a very long time, is that presidents are given accolades and also like just negative feedback for things even when they aren't necessarily in control of it. Like one person is not in control of the unemployment rate. Okay. One person is not in control of the inflation rate or any of the other economic indicators. Macroeconomics is the aggregate of every decision that we all make, consumers, businesses, the government, the trade. So I will say that because of, and we know that post-COVID, we had high inflation. It was global inflation. One of the things, and I credit, and it's not just me, but just when you read about the analysis, is that Jerome Powell, the chair of the Fed, He was appointed by President Trump during his first term, and he continued to serve under President Biden, which is not unusual. Fed chairs generally will continue even when political parties change in the White House for consistent monetary policy. And because of Powell's Fed, they have been able to bring the inflation rate down in order to bring us to what we would call a soft landing, while still keeping that unemployment rate at what on the surface is a somewhat healthy unemployment rate.
So what does the 4.2% mean? Like the unemployment rate?
So that 4.2%, it really means, so that means full employment. That's really what we're looking for. So those who are out there actively seeking employment, are finding employment or finding it in a short period of time, that we don't have unemployment related to a recession or an economic downturn. But that is the aggregate number, and I don't think that tells the whole story about what might be going on right now.
And also, like this report, I'll have to say it's from the June monetary report, and a lot can happen in a span of like a couple months.
The first quarter of this year was adjusted down. And then you're right, because you're exactly right, that GDP rose to 3.8%. But we saw when we looked at it, in fact, when we looked at it in class, you could see that import number that really popped up. And that was because of the retaliatory tariffs that were announced at the White House. What we're seeing and what we're expecting might be two different things. When this policy first came out, economists really thought that the tariffs were going to have a more immediate impact on the economy. And then just to be clear, tariffs are taxes, and they are taxes on imports. So consumers and businesses in the United States pay a tax on those goods that are coming from other countries. But what we've seen is that a lot of the larger companies and even smaller companies, the businesses, have been absorbing a lot of these tariffs and not passing them directly on to the consumers. But even in the Fed minutes from the last Fed report and Chair Powell's press conference, he cautioned that the underlying implications of the tariffs and the immigration policies are starting to show in the overall economic growth, and that's another thing that we're not sure. Like as far as the labor market goes, it's
and also I would like to say from the monetary report, they did say that labor has increased less robustly than in previous years, and immigration appearing to have slowed down sharply, and contributing to the sort of the low robust increase in unemployment. So in a way, it's sort of interesting, like, how economics really plays out in like our world in terms of, the Trump administration having economists who I feel are quite credible in terms of their degrees and all that. And in terms of other economists who are not in the administration having sort of contrasting predictions and verdicts. So how, for a topic or a skill that is sort of objective, like it's this number, why is it they will have such contrasting like verdicts in terms of like economic growth from the Trump administration and then recession from other economists? Like there's no sort of, it's day and night in terms of their verdicts.
So I don't know if it's day and night, but there's gray area interpretation. So when it comes to something like international trade and free trade. So free trade is something that we know that it increases the standard of living for all countries that are involved in trade. It's a theory, it's called comparative advantage. Now, that does not mean that the standard of living at every single country is going to come at the same rate.
Yeah.
But it also means that a small country, that if it's a country that makes or grows cocoa or bananas, or they have the economic resources to do that because they have the climate and they have the soil and they have the know-how to do that. So even though that country is much smaller than, say, the United States, it makes more sense for the United States to focus on like soybeans and wheat and growing that because we have those resources. So we do what we do best, specialize in, and then we have extra, and then we trade with the country that's doing what they do best, like say bananas, and then they trade that with us. So then because there's extra, everybody gets more. So that is that really has been, it's like an apolitical theory for a very long time. So there are some economists that believe that tariffs are good as a blunt instrument in order to increase domestic production, and that's absolutely true. Like that is true. That is absolutely true. But over the long term, doing that creates trade wars and retaliatory tariffs that end up costing, like in our case, it will end up costing Americans more.
I mean, you were talking about how businesses are absorbing the tariffs. Sort of, I don't think there's really a proper answer, but is there an estimate of how much capacity business could absorb until they inflict on the consumers?
Larger corporations have the ability to absorb much more than small businesses. So small businesses are going to be hurt and either have to find new ways to to buy their inventory that they're not going to be subject to that many tariffs. So I don't know the answer to that, but it can't go on
for much longer.
Right.
So recently the Fed lowered interest rates the second time this year with a 10-2 vote. The press briefing, when I was watching it with the chair, Jerome Powell, he seemed sort of hesitant in terms of the market, in terms of we're currently in a government shutdown and the data has not really been released for this quarter. So should we be hesitant as sort of in the market? Should the markets be hesitant?
It is a note of caution. I think it's a note of caution that if your expectations were that you were maybe going to wait to buy something because you thought that the interest rates were going to go down again. So if this was like financing a car or a home equity loan, anything like that, that should probably not be something that you should use as the final end piece of information in order to make that decision. I think it also signals that the Fed is concerned about inflation.
Okay.
Because they don't want that to peak up again. It's the further away it gets from that 2%, the more cautious that they are.
I want to ask about the government shutdown. So we know of the SNAP benefits that roughly 42 million Americans were going to lose, and what other economic impacts would we experience with let's say a government shutdown?
So right now, we're in uncharted territory.
Yes. Yeah.
So as long as the government is shut down, people are not getting paid, there's a multiplier effect to that. So no pay means no spending.
Right.
The other piece that goes with that is what also happens is that it also stresses food banks. It stresses needs for housing. I mean, if rent is not being paid, those kind of things. Anything that creates a shock in the economy like that there's going to be some decrease in GDP. Now, in the past, that has happened, but when the government opens up, the recovery is fairly quick. when people get back to work and then they get their checks. It's hard to say because I think we've got a lot of variables that are going on here too. Because while this is going on, there's trade negotiations that are going on. The holiday season is coming. There's a lot of uncertainty that has been in the economy really since January. And uncertainty means that businesses are like leery of hiring people, like maybe for the holiday, because they can't project what it's going to be. So I think there could be a trickle effect to this because we just don't know what's going to be next or how long this is going to be.
Yeah, and kind of like moving to more of international affairs. So a lot of people were definitely concerned, especially from the other side of the aisle, in terms of the Trump administration giving $42 billion to bail out Argentina, considering that a lot of people are going to lose their SNAP benefits. So this was a way to somewhat cool the sort of economic crisis that's happening in Argentina. And my question is, sort of, what is the financial crisis in Argentina that we need to give $40 billion?
They're facing high inflation. And a crisis where their currency could collapse, and they have high inflation and a low reserve. The part that makes it unique is the relationship between President Trump and
Javier Milei.
Yes. They are of friendly terms, and they discuss this in order to really, I guess, keep that diplomatic alignment that we have with Argentina, and as well as trying to kind of quell if there was some type of like systemic contagion, that if the Argentinian peso collapsed, then what would collapse next, and how would that have an effect on the broader economy.
I mean, it's gotten to a point like it's sort of criminal because now people are now relying on dollars now to buy things.
Yes.
And it's like sort of criminal now to also use dollars in Argentina because they're trying to somewhat maintain their Argentinian peso. So like, do you think like $40 billion can help an economy?
I can speak to the way that this is set up. Is $20 billion was set up as what's called a currency swap.
Okay.
So basically, that $20 billion is like a line of credit.
Okay.
So it's supposed to be a line of credit that if Argentina needs the dollars, they can draw down on the dollars. But then they're supposed to then they're supposed to pay it back just like a line of credit.
Okay.
But there's that other 20 billion is being set up with like private banks and other wealth funds, and I am not really familiar with that structure. I did read it was Paul Krugman. He's a Nobel laureate economist, and his Substack, which is really good, and he was giving evidence of in the past this has not been successful. It's very, very difficult to put a dollar amount on something like this, especially when to try to support an economy long term. It's very unique.
But we talked about sort of the sweeping tariffs, and recently, of course, when Trump made his sort of diplomatic trip to Asia, which I remember he put like such high tariffs on like China, which is the second largest economy in the world. Since now they've gone back to the tariffs that they had before, like pre-tariffs, will that somewhat not affect consumers in terms of us paying tariffs?
Uncertainty is the buzzword when it comes to this. So I think with some certainty, things will stabilize, and that would be better.
What is one thing you would like people to know about, like sort of economics? Because a lot of people won't really have sort of, not everyone will be able versed in economics, but what is one thing you'd like them to know about the economy or economics?
So that's such a big question. question, but I'm going to say it's very, very important to understand and ask questions. I think that's probably, understand that you can ask questions. If you don't know what inflation means, it's okay, but ask. Or, look it up, and also check the bias in the sources, because we are being bombarded by misinformation. And when we have, in this country, we have the ability, and I'm going to go back to voting, we live in a democratic republic, and we have this gift to be able to vote. And when we go into that voting booth, it's for us, and we want to be, and we should be, as informed as we possibly can when it comes to what kind of decisions are going to affect my job, what kind of decisions are going to affect my education. So economics is the key to, I think, an informed citizenry, which means that then when you vote for the person that best aligns with you. It's not necessarily like always political party or anything like that. It's what aligns with what you need and what your family needs.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for your time, Professor. Professor Pescatore is a professor here at Montgomery County Community College, and she also serves on the 5th Ward Committee in the city of Philadelphia, and will be running for election in May. Thank you for your time. You can subscribe to my Substack down below and my YouTube channel. Thank you for watching The Abstract with Musao. Till next time.